Good evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome to the 2024 Dickinson Area Chamber of Commerce Ag Livestock Forum here on the campus of Dickinson State University. We welcome our in-person audience as well as those who will be watching the recorded version on our YouTube channel or on Consolidated Channel 18. Thank you to our friends at Consolidated for your presence this evening. And on that note, we would ask you as audience members to please make sure that during today's presentations that your phones are silenced. Thank you. We're calling this our 5th annual Ag Livestock Forum with the note that the event did not occur in 2021. We're back on the campus of Dickinson State. We're thankful to our hosts at DSU, and we also need to thank many others who make this event possible. Beginning with chamber staff members, our marketing and communications manager is Alicia Erickson. Right next to her is our administrative assistant, Avery Belland. Avery put together the country music playlist. I hope there are no complaints. Good tunes, Avery. Let's help me thank Alicia and Avery for all they do for the chamber. In addition to the Ag Livestock Forum, the Chamber Ag Committee's annual events include the following. We have quarterly ag photo contests, and that artwork has been featured and will continue to be in the next half hour or so. National Ag Week is coming up in March. The 4-H Livestock Show Picnic, Banquet in a Field, the NDSU Extension, Dickinson Research Extension Center Field Day, and Harvest Festival are all work of the Chamber Ag Committee. We are thankful to our committee chair, Brian Dukart of Dakota Bank, Vice Chair Kylie Gorosky of Dakota Community Bank, and additional members of the Chamber Ag Committee. If you are an Ag Committee member, please wave so that we can recognize you. Please help me thank them for all they do for the Chamber. There are many major sponsors, and I need to recognize them, the full list, including Bravera Bank, Choice Bank, the City of Dickinson, Consolidated, Dakota Bank, Dakota Community Bank and Trust, Dakota Outdoor Advertising, the Dickinson Press, Dickinson State University, the Eagles Club, Farm Credit Services of Mandan, Gooseneck Implement, Helena Agra Enterprises, JP Frame Shop, Rough Rider Electric Co-op, Runnings, Southwest Grain, CHS, Stark Billings Soil Conservation District, Steffes Group, Stockman's Livestock Exchange, Western Cooperative Credit Union, and West Plains Incorporated. I am a city boy. I am not, my mother grew up on a farm. It's second generation for me, but we want to bring forward the voice of agriculture on KDIX AM 1230 to carry us most of the rest of the way. Please, at this time, welcome Mike Renner, KDIX Radio.
Thanks, Carter. That was quite the introduction. I'm, voice of agriculture. Here we go. But would like to thank and recognize everybody for taking time out of their busy schedules tonight. We've got two great speakers with us. We've got about, 10 minutes till we go to supper. Should we just do her now?
We're going to do her now. They're ready.
I was going to say, I'm hungry, Carter. I came from work. Work at KDIX Radio, as Carter mentioned. Been employed there for over 25 years. Do a lot of farm and ranch programs throughout the year, do a lot of farm and ranch things throughout the year. And, one thing that I can say is we constantly have a change in agriculture, whether you be a farmer, whether you be a rancher, whether you be a combination of the two. There's always something different. There's always something a new day brings. And what we get with programs like this, I hope one thing tonight. I hope each one of us can take one thing out from our speakers tonight, just so we can take and put that to work for us and just another tool in the toolbox. At this time, we'd like to bring up our first speaker tonight, and I'd like to remind you also, there's a cash bar back there if you'd like to get a beverage. As we're going along here, you're sure welcome to do that. Restrooms are on the north end of the BAC, and our first speaker tonight we're going to have from CattleFax, and I'd like to welcome everybody back after enjoying that good meal and conversation. I'd like to remind you too, please put your phone on mute so that we don't have a bunch of dings and bings going as we listen to Troy Bockelmann at CattleFax. He's been with CattleFax since 2016. He now serves as the Director of Grain and Protein Analysis, primarily responsible in including analysis of all aspects of the cattle and beef industry, combined with research in feed grain markets and global protein and grain markets. Grew up in a small town in southwestern Minnesota, a farming community, and has degrees in agribusiness and management from Southwest Minnesota State University and a master's degree in ag and resource economics through Colorado State University. At this time, I'd like to welcome Troy Bockelmann.
Can everyone hear me? Sounds all right? All right. Well, first of all, I want to say thanks to everyone who invited me here, the Ag Committee and everyone else. So like you said, my name is Troy Bockelmann, and you know, I'm a director of protein and grain analysis at CattleFax. And is everyone here familiar with CattleFax? Pretty much? Okay. So that's good news. Ultimately, he said, I grew up in Southwest Minnesota. I live in southeast of Denver now. And both of those, I don't necessarily want to claim, right? So I grew up in Southwest Minnesota. I live in Denver, but I do identify as a South Dakotan because our family farm is right on the border of Minnesota and South Dakota. And if our house was on the other side of the driveway, we would all be South Dakotans. So ultimately, South Dakotan. Is that okay to say in North Dakota? I mean, I'm not a Jackrabbits fan, so, you know, now I'm okay. Well, why don't we just go ahead and start, and we'll talk a little bit about the cattle markets, we'll talk about some grain markets, we'll talk about some supply and demand, and ultimately get to that final question of what's that price outlook, what are those issues that we're going to be needing to pay attention over the course of the next, 1, 2, 3 years. So, very first slide here, right? Welcome to the cattle cycle. If you look at pork and poultry production over time, you can pretty much draw a line that goes up and to the right. They continue to increase pork production and increase poultry production over time. They have a lot more confinement, they have a lot shorter life cycle of those animals, but when we're talking about cattle, we're talking about starting at that cow-calf level. And it really comes back to what's the profitability and what's the rainfall or the feed we have for those animals. And so cattle tend to cycle. We tend to increase the cow herd, and then we tend to decrease the cow herd. We've been going through a liquidation for a period of time now, and we're ultimately sitting here on that brink of an expansion, where we're just starting to sniff that expansion, and what's that look like going forward? So if we just want to go to the next slide, that next chart just goes through pretty simple here, right? When you have less beef cows or less animals going through the system, you tend to see prices rise. You tend to see those prices rise. That money trickles down to the cow-calf producer, maybe with some help with some Mother Nature. The cow-calf producer is feeling pretty good. He starts to expand. As he starts to expand, there's a lag of about 2 years. You start increasing those beef supplies and prices start to come off, and you start the cycle all over again. That cycle tends to take, right around that 10-year period. This is where we've been, and this is looking at the beef cows in drought. And you'll notice here that abnormally dry and that yellow, all the way back to the dark red, which is the exceptional. And this is looking at the last couple years, so really 21, 22, and 23 as a whole. Just look at the top of that yellow bar. That yellow bar compared to history, when we're talking about all the beef cows in the U.S., they were struggling. There was a lot of dry weather out there that has impacted that liquidation cycle that we're going through. So then we carry that forward. And this chart here on the next one goes all the way back to 1950. And you can see those cycles, the ebbs and flows of the total cattle inventory. So that total cattle inventory, that's not only counting just beef cows, but that's counting dairy cows and bulls and everything else. That's all the cattle that's in the U.S. Look at where we are today, that very far red line right on the end of the chart. We now have the smallest cattle inventory we've had, total cattle, since the 1950s. But look at that green line. That green line isn't all the way back to where we were in 1950. That green line is still up the upper end of the range. We continue to do more with less. If we want to talk about a sustainable business, if we want to talk about an environmentally friendly business, if we want to talk about just efficient business, This chart right here, right? Look, we continue to have the same amount of beef production on average with less animals. That's a business model that just proves efficiency. How do we get there? Well, we have better cattle, better genetics, better nutrition. We have utilization of the dairy herd and all those other things, animal husbandry, that just continue to allow us to produce more beef with less total inputs. So where are we at today? A lot of times when we're talking to customers, when we're talking to people out in the country, they talk a lot about 2014. And if we were in the cattle industry or business in 2014, you had prices go into a November high when we're talking about the fed cattle market, and then they move lower over the course of the next couple of years. And it really, if you look at the shape of that line, it looks like a V. We call that a V top. Ultimately, are we looking at a V top today? We have less beef cows out there than we did in the cycle lows of 2014. But look at the rapid expansion, 16, 17, and 18 of the beef cow inventory number. In May of 2013, the rain showed up in the southern plains, and all the calves that were in the stockers, out on wheat, out on grass, they all got turned into cows. And we aggressively expanded that beef cow inventory number. Now we get into 2024. In 2024, there was about 220,000 less beef cows than there was on January 1st of 2023. And it looked like going through 2023, we were going to start to see that expansion take shape, but the moisture never really came. We transitioned from a La Nina, forgive me, I'm from Minnesota and I don't speak Spanish, a La Nina to an El Nino. I'm sure there's lots of people in the room here that will say you are not saying that correctly. I have tried many, many, many times to try to learn how to say that correctly, and I never can. Now we're going into 24, 25. What's that expansion look like? It's going to be a lot slower of an expansion. It's going to be a more methodical expansion. We're not just going to turn those pipes onto those replacement heifers and turn them all into cows. Now, there are regions that we did see some expansion in 2023. We saw some expansion up here in the northern plains. But ultimately, when it comes back to the total cattle in the U.S., they were still struggling. So we do see a little bit more decrease here heading into 2025. That first red bar, that's going to be January 1st of 2025. So that's going to be how many cows we liquidate through 2024, that on January 1st of 2025, we start to see that expansion build as we go through 2025. On the next chart, look at the beef cow inventories by region. This is just the change from last year. And that's why we can't necessarily look at that in our own backyard and say, well, we're starting to see some expansion in South Dakota and North Dakota. We're starting to see some expansion or holding those heifers back in the northern plains. Look at just the state of Texas. They liquidated 185,000 beef cows just in 2023. It takes a lot of expansion across the rest, and even up there in North Dakota, you still liquidated about 16,000 beef cows through 2023 because those beef replacement heifers, you pull them back, but they're not cows yet. They're not counted as cows until they calf. So they'll show up in next year's data. On the next chart, what's it going to take to expand? Ultimately, we're going to need to get some grass, especially down into the south. We're going to need to get some cash. We're going to need to get the cow-calf producer profitable, comfortable to expand. If we have grass and we have cash, we'll have calves. That's the bottom line right there. Now, can you come back and say, is this really that simple, right? Well, in a big picture it is, right? We do have the age of the cow-calf producer increasing. We do have cow-calf producers that maybe have, 100 head of mama cows, and they're just not, they don't want to expand. But the industry as a whole will expand if this formula proves correct. On the next chart, we're starting to get some moisture. This chart here is just looking at the 60-day total precipitation weighted by all the beef cows in the U.S., excluding Alaska and Hawaii. They don't tend to drive the cattle market very much. So this is looking at the contiguous 48 states. We're getting some moisture today. The Southern Plains is getting some moisture. That El Nino has taken hold, and you're starting to see that moisture show up. Look at a year ago. That red line was above the average, and that red line was at the upper end of that standard deviation range. They were getting moisture a year ago, but then they dried out as we got through the summer. So what's the forecast look like as we go forward? Because ultimately, if we're talking about grass, we're not necessarily talking about getting the grass up in the northern plains. We want the grass in the northern plains, but the deficit has been in the southern plains. On the next chart, Matt Makins is a meteorologist that we use, and this is the models that suggest when we transition from an El Nino to a neutral back to a La Nina. And unfortunately, the models are showing that we're going to transition back into a La Nina. A La Nina means that we're going to turn dry again into the southern plains. So the moisture that we've had recently, it'll depend on how long this takes to transition. Look at the blue bar and the JJA. JJA is June, July, and August. You're already starting to transition back into a La Nina by the time a 50% probability of better by the time you get into the summer. So, bad news, good news, it's not great news, but he'd also tell you that we've been in a 20-year dry cycle. And that as we go forward, we're gonna transition into a La Nina again, and when we come out of the La Nina, we should then transition into a 20-year wet cycle. So we gotta go through the next period of dryness to transition in that atmosphere and into the sea surface temperatures to more of that wetter pattern. On the next chart, here's his forecast. I'm not sure what happened there, but ultimately, I did not try to do that, but apparently I'm better than I think I am. So, looking at the precipitation, there we go. That's better. All right, looking at the precipitation. The top chart shows the neutral weather pattern years. The neutral, it's measured at sea surface temperatures right on the equator. If you look at the neutral years, your precipitation in the southern plains, look at Texas into the spring. It's really green, right? That's above average precipitation. Then you transition into the summer and the fall, and you do start to dry out, but it's more of that neutral, more of that average type period. Now look at the bottom. We're not suggesting we're going to have a La Nina in the spring. It's above a 50% probability that we transition to a La Nina in June, July, or August. But look at your summer and your fall La Ninas. You start to dry out. North Dakota, you look through the spring, look through the summer, whether you're in a neutral or whether you're in a La Nina, you should have average to better precipitation. Northern Plains looks like it's going to be in pretty good shape. You get out into a fall in a La Nina, and all of a sudden you do start to dry out in western North Dakota. So last winter, pretty rough up here. This winter has been pretty nice. Transitioning into that La Nina, you still have grass heading into the fall, but do you get the snowpack heading into the spring of 2025 in the western half of North Dakota? On the next chart, one more. So this is what's going to drive the expansion, the beef replacement heifers. Because not only do we have to stop liquidating beef cows, but we have to start developing those next cows to come through there. You look at January 1st of 2024, beef replacement heifers were down 71,000 head. So you're not expanding in 2024 as a whole in the US. So you can start in 2024 by the time you get your fall calf crop and start to develop those beef replacement heifers so that as you get into 2025, you're starting to see that expansion. Well, if you have a beef replacement heifer on January 1st of 25, it has a calf in the spring of 25, it turns into beef 2 years later or 18 months later after that. So that tail of that cycle, the tail of that expansion takes time to develop. So what does that mean for price, right? That would be positive price as we go forward for at least the next couple years, because you have that tail it takes to get that expansion. So now we'll just talk a little bit about corn, soybeans, and hay. We'll go to the next slide. North Dakota has been planting corn acres. I don't know if anyone has been noticing that, but ultimately the change from 23 to 22, North Dakota added about 1.1 million corn acres in just that year's time. And North Dakota has gone from the 12th largest corn area, or corn state, acre state, to the 8th largest corn acre state here in 2023. So a lot more of that grain is being produced up here for those cattle as well. We go to the next one. So what do we see for 2024 and ultimately this year's crop? The USDA had their Ag Outlook Forum last week. It's not a survey. They just put out what they think they're going to do. They had corn acres down 3.6 million acres, and they had soybean acres up 3.9 million acres. That trend of less corn acres and more soybean acres for 2024 planting season, CattleFax wasn't near as much as the switch. We have corn acres down 2 million acres and soybean acres up 2 million acres. You look at wheat, wheat's down about 2 million acres. Winter wheat seedings were down 2.1 million acres. So ultimately, kind of a steady spring wheat crop, but we already saw the seedings decrease on the winter wheat. Next chart. So what's that balance sheet look like? We're going to use our numbers, CattleFax's numbers, corn acres down 2 million acres. We're going to use a 179 yield for a U.S. average. So the last 5 years, corn yield has averaged 2.5 bushels below trend. The 5 years before that, corn yield averaged 3% above trend. So ultimately, with that La Nina coming back, we're suggesting we're probably not going to get a trend line yield. But even with 2 million less corn acres and a 179 yield, we're talking about stocks to use at 16.5%. Stocks to use is just a measure to look at. Ending stocks divided by total use gives us a picture of what that looks like. Because if I were to say to you, we have 2.4 billion bushels of ending stocks, it might sound like a big number. But if we use 200 billion, well, it's not that big of a number. Now, we don't use 200 billion, we use like 15 billion. But you get the point. Stocks to use gives us that measurement through time. On the next chart, so what are we suggesting? That's that 16.5% stocks to use. The USDA, that number that they came out with last week was 17.2%. Doesn't change the story. You look at this chart over the course of the last 10 years, corn's in a comfortable position. We have plenty of corn around us. And even if we see demand increase heading into the next marketing year, there's still plenty of corn around us. We still need to pay attention to the March prospective plantings report. Do we see a bigger decrease than what we're suggesting at 2 million acres? And then we go into what's the crop look like, what's the weather going in there. But ultimately, we've set ourselves up for a pretty comfortable position on corn. I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I don't want anyone to quote me, even though we're going to be on TV, but did we just price in the lows in spot corn futures for the year? Spot corn futures went down in the 420s. Did the market see this coming and just price in the lows for the year? You have a 50-cent spread between March corn and Deese corn. Deese is at a premium. We could just have gone and priced in those, and we'll be in a practical range as we go forward. I'll call it 425 to 550 throughout all of 2024. So as an end user of corn, and we wanted to take a position on corn, we're probably in a pretty comfortable position right now where we might want to add some length in the market. If we're a farmer of a corn and we're looking at shorting the market or selling corn, I'd probably just want to wait a little bit, right? Because the old adage is we kill the corn crop twice every summer. We don't even have it in the ground yet. Let's go ahead and wait till we kill it at least once or twice before we go start shorting this market. Ultimately, the managed money shorts have come into this market. The managed money is the outside funds They've come in this market, and they're now the second largest short position in history. So the market is pricing in, my expectation, the lower end of the range for the year. Ultimately, markets are anticipatory, and the market's sensing these supplies, so it does provide opportunity as an end user if we wanted to go ahead and lock up either some physical or some length. For soybeans, we have acres up 2 million acres. The USDA had acres up 3.9 million acres. We have a 52 yield, the USDA used a 52 yield. That's trendline yield. Over the course of the last several years, soybeans have been a little bit more resilient than corn and have been a lot closer to that trendline yield. So ultimately, when you factor in a little bit of an increase in demand, you have stocks to use just shy of 10%. The market has been concerned about soybean supplies, and then Brazil went and produced a record crop a year ago, second highest soybean crop in history this year. The market's not so much worried about supplies, and on the next chart, you'll see that you've seen the soybean market come off as well. But has it priced in the lows? No, I don't think it has. I think the soybean market has a little bit more risk as we go into the second half of 2024, because what happens if soybean acres don't increase like that? What happens if China starts buying corn from the US instead of buying it from Brazil? Things like that. Brazil's just harvesting their crop. In the last WASDE report, they just raised last year's Brazilian crop. I don't really know what we're doing this year because they're just harvesting it. I think it's a little bit tighter. So ultimately, an end user of corn or of soybeans, or as a soybean farmer today, I'm going to be a little bit more patient. I'm going to let this market have a little bit of time. If I'm looking at a soybean farmer and asking, should we short this market? Not today. I'd be looking up there closer to that 14, maybe even 14 and a half going into the spring. We still have to kill the soybean crop as well. So then we come back to hay. And hay is an interesting subject, right? Because hay is very regional, and it varies by state. On December 1st of 2022, we had the smallest hay stocks that we've had since 1959. And in 2022, we produced the smallest hay crop in the US since 1954. Prices have responded to that, and it's very regional. We were talking to someone earlier, and they asked me how much hay is in for Colorado. A little small square bale in Colorado is like 15 to 18 bucks. You go to like the feed store, it's 18 bucks. I can drive to Minnesota, see my family, pick up 150 small square bales of hay, haul it home. I get a free trip home plus 600 bucks. So every time I go home, I make money. Ultimately, as we go into the next year, we're seeing hay prices soften, especially in the West. Exports have slowed down. They've had good moisture. Hay prices have come off a little bit up in the northern plains here, but it's still the southern plains, places like that, that we need to see a little bit more price relief. We're expecting to see acres just slightly bigger. The first hay crop should be pretty good, maybe into the second, then we dry out. Depends on if you get a third or a fourth hay crop. Those could be a little rough. So we do see production increasing and prices coming off about $20 a ton on average in the US. Regionally, bigger differences, but on average in the US, expect softer hay prices as we go into the second half of 2024. So now we'll talk a little bit about the herd supply, or the herd and the supply. This is looking at commercial beef cow slaughter. In 2022, beef cow slaughter was the largest on record. We had an aggressive liquidation from 2019 all the way into 2022. And we went into 2023 and we slowed the liquidation, or slowed beef cow slaughter, I should say, by 450,000 head. As we go into 2024, we're expecting another 580,000 head decrease. And you might look at that line from 2022 to that first purple bar in 2024 and say, with those numbers, we have to be slowing that liquidation pace. We have to be. But it's not so much that we're stopping the liquidation, we're slowing it, but it's not necessarily stopping it. And on the next chart, because it all comes back to that culling rate, we're still culling 10.5% of our beef cows in 2024 based upon those forecasts. You look at that first blue bar on the very far right, that's still a big culling rate. It's not so much about the amount of cows we're harvesting, it's the amount of cows relative to how many cows we have. We're still in a culling rate as we go through there. So then we transition into 2025 and we're back there closer to that 9% area. That's where we would suggest we start to see the stabilization of the beef cow herd, and then you start developing those beef replacement heifers to turn into cows so you can grow the beef cow herd. So we've started the development in the north, but we still have a pretty aggressive slaughter rate when it comes to the beef cows that are not replacing, or I shouldn't say the beef replacement heifers are not replacing the cow slaughter. On the next chart, so all those mamas have babies, those babies, wind up in feed yards, and it ultimately comes back to steer and heifer slaughter. In 2023, we saw a shift lower in slaughter of a little over 1 million head. And as we go into 2024, we have another shift lower of about 780,000 head. And the reason we had a big change going from 22 to 23 is in 22, we were still carrying cattle from 2020. We were still uncurrent on that front end supply, because when we shut those plants down in 2020 and they didn't have that harvest rate, you backed up about 1 million head of fed cattle that had to work their way through the system until you finally got through them in 2022. Now we go into 2024, we're down 780,000 head for the year. Heading into next year, we see another drop of a little over 1 million head. And you get that next drop by holding the heifers back out of the system. That's truly where you start to expand the beef cow herd, is as we go through this year, then those beef cows get counted later on. So when we're looking at this chart, you have 1 million head, then 780, then another million, then another 300,000. You do some rough math and you get close to like a 3.2, 3.3 million head decrease in fed slaughter before we get to the cycle lows. You have a couple more years where we're going to tighten those supplies of beef. But we have added to the system. So it's not all about beef cows, because we're utilizing more of that dairy cow herd through the beef on dairy crosses. So you take a dairy cow and you use the semen of a beef bull, and you have that beef dairy cross that gets put into the system, and ultimately that is replacing some of the supply that we lost through those beef cows. Now, I don't have a 2024 forecast on here, but ultimately in 2024 probably won't look much different than 2023. Because as we got into 2023, the dairy industry really struggled. And they pushed really hard on the beef on dairy crosses because it was another source of revenue for them. Well, now dairy prices have come back up. They're starting to find a little bit of money. They don't have the dairy replacement heifers. So they're going to take some time here to build those dairy replacement heifers going forward. And we might see 2024 beef on dairies look a lot like 2023. Then you get into the second half of 2024, or even the first half of 25, they're going to go back to pushing it hard. Now, we're sitting there just shy of 3 million head. Just rough napkin math. If there's 9 million dairy cows, and you utilize half of those dairy cows for beef on dairy, that gives you 4.5 million beef on dairy animals as kind of your limit. Because if they go above that, they're going to run out of dairy replacement heifers. So ultimately, you're looking at about another 1.5 million beef on dairy that can come into the system over the course of the next several years. Then we talk about trade. Well, if we are producing less beef, we're likely going to export less beef. When it comes to Japan, South Korea, and China. Those are the three markets where we're shipping less beef to. And we're shipping less beef to them. Japan's a declining, aging population. China has some economic headwinds, and South Korea is relatively a stable market. Then you're looking at Mexico and Canada to kind of make up that difference. So we do see exports slowing down over the course of the next couple of years. But as a percent of production, we see that percent of production increasing. Meaning of the beef we're producing, we're exporting a little bigger share, but ultimately exports are moving lower. On the import side, Australia went through the drought. They liquidated their beef cow herd, their cow herd. They've rebuilt their cow herd. 2023, Australian slaughter was up about 25% from a year ago. 2024, it's going to be up another 15%. So we can look at this, and we're going to see imports increase and exports decrease. That balance of trade is going to favor imports over exports. And it comes back to per capita beef consumption. So we can look at that a couple different ways. This is looking at production plus imports minus exports divided by population. So how many pounds of beef per person are on the domestic market for us to consume? And we saw about a 1.1 pound drop per capita in 2023. The balance of trade, it would have been closer to about a 3 pound drop per capita. A 1.7 pound is expected for this year. So we can look at this and we can talk about demand and we can talk about supply and we can talk about all those other things that go in there. But ultimately, if we're talking about at the equilibrium, where demand is constant, every 1 pound change in per capita supplies is worth about $10 to the Fed market. Now, demand plays a role in that. We'll talk about demand here in a minute. So here's where we get to the nitty-gritty. And I'm probably in the wrong room for this, but I don't really want to eat 1.7 pounds per capita less in 2024 than I did a year ago. So you look at per capita pork consumption, relatively flat. Per capita broiler consumption is increasing. So I will trade you 2 pounds of chicken for every 1 pound of beef you ship me. So I don't have to eat less beef. Any takers? No. You'll do it? No. Oh, man, I've said that so many times and I've never gotten a taker. But ultimately, that's a positive for beef, right? Because it's the taste, it's the experience, it's everything else that we have in there that's driving that consumer demand that I don't want to transition from beef to chicken, that I don't want to transition from beef to pork. That's the success story as we think about the beef industry, is that trade-off isn't a trade-off near as much as it used to be because of the quality of beef. The other thing is, oh, go back to this, sorry. I pointed at that, not at you. Yeah. What's different between today and 2014? We have a lot more pork and poultry today than we did in 2014. Look at your 2014 pork consumption and your broiler consumption. There's about 20 pounds per person more on the market today than there was in 2014 when you combine beef, pork, and poultry. So there's that trade-off. So when I talked about that $10 per hundredweight for every pound, we have to add back, there's now a little better trade-off than there was in 2014. And maybe instead of at the equilibrium it's $10, is it $7 or $8, right? That's the supply versus the demand. So let's talk about that. We'll go to the next one. Interest rates, inflation. We're on TV, so I'm going to keep it mild here, right? Ultimately, prime interest rates are double than they were just a couple years ago. The interest costs for capital continue to increase, whether you're talking about raising cattle, buying cattle, whether you're talking about feed yards, whether you're talking about corn, soybeans, whether you're talking about household expenses. And your consumer price index is off its highs, but when it's a positive number, your consumer price, they're increasing, right? So the consumer is facing headwinds of not only higher interest rates with record credit card debt today, but they're facing headwinds with the consumer price index or inflation continuing to increase. So this is looking at per capita disposable income. We had all that funny money in there going after COVID. We're back to kind of those levels we were at, just above where we were prior to COVID. So there's still money out there. The consumer still has some money. And inflation has come off. You look at this though, look at the CPI, the orange line, the food away from home versus the food at home, which is the green line. The restaurant sector is still struggling. The menu prices continue to increase, the customer traffic continues to slow, and if we're talking about where our beef goes, you're essentially talking about 40 to 45% of all beef is sold through some sort of food service. Another 40 to 45% is sold at retail, and little less than 15% is exports. But food away from home is now up 1.2% on a year-over-year change. So the consumer is getting a little bit of relief, still higher prices, but that growth rate has slowed. Next one. I like this chart because I think this puts it in a little bit more perspective. And this is the minutes worked an average consumer will have to work for 1 pound of choice beef. The question is, how high do prices need to get before the consumer really gives us some pushback, right? Because ultimately, if we're talking about prices going higher over the course of the next couple of years, is the consumer still going to be paying for it, willing to pay for it? Well, we're in an uptrend over time. We're kind of right in the middle of the range, right? We're talking about 12 and a half minutes of work for a pound of choice beef. This isn't necessarily bearish demand, is it? It says the consumer still has the capacity to buy beef. They still have the willingness to buy beef, so we're not pricing them out of the market yet. So when we take in supply and we take in demand, ultimately you look at the percent change in quantity and the percent change in price to give you a metric of demand. So beef prices, they're not going to go up as fast as they have been. They're going to continue to increase, but we're going to see a little bit of softer demand, right? So now we're back to that $10 for every pound of beef. Well, it's probably not $10 because we're going to see a little bit of softening demand. But if our forecast for this year at retail prices at $7.85 and our per capita supply down 1.7 pounds, would you necessarily suggest that that's poor demand? It's a little worse demand than we had last year, but historically it's still pretty strong beef demand. So we're not at the level we're going to take the consumer and completely push them away from beef. So what do we need to pay attention to, right? Inflation, call it between 3.5% for this year. You know, interest rate cuts as we go into the second half of the year, we would expect 2 or 3 interest rate cuts. Then you kind of get into your GDP. So recession, are we worried about a recession in 2024? If you're talking about between 2 and 2.5% growth, you're not talking about a recession. Recession is, well, they changed the rules on us, right? But it used to be 2 quarters of negative GDP growth. Then apparently we went into periods of times where that wasn't the case. But ultimately, you know, unemployment's low. What's the difference between previous times of economic hardship versus today? The worker is not concerned about his job today. So when we talk about savings rates being historically low, and we're talking about credit card balances being record high, the consumer feels more comfortable that he's going to have a job tomorrow. So is it a risk? Yes, it's a risk, right? But is it something that's really going to push this market? Probably not. What's the big change we had in 2023? Because if we're talking about a 1 pound drop in per capita beef supplies and fed prices were up substantially higher, it was leverage. It was the difference between the capacity of the packing houses and the available cattle that we have to harvest. And as we go over the course of the next couple years, we're going to have more capacity to harvest cattle, fed cattle, than we're going to have fed cattle to harvest. So the leverage is transitioning from the packer down to the feed yard, and then we'll continue to transition down to the cow-calf producer. Because ultimately, if you're going back to that equation of cash plus grass, if you have the grass, you got to get that leverage to transition to the cow-calf producer so that he has the cash to expand. And this is looking at that relationship. So this is the fed price minus the drop credit as the percent of the composite beef cutout. And you look at that transition from 22 to 23 going into 2024. And at 57%, that would suggest you have a packer on average in 2024 at a break even. That doesn't mean they're always at a break even. Just in the first 45 days of this year, they were making $100 a head and they're losing $100 a head. But on average, you have a packer at a break even. So what does that suggest? We would suggest that we're going to see the fed market average about 184 this year. And ultimately, we have a 170 to a $2 range. Those red dots, that was Friday's closing futures price. What we're going to be paying attention to is how high does the market get this spring? And really that 190 level. Because if we see a Fed market push above that 190 going into the spring, we're likely going to average the year a little bit higher. And why would the Fed market push a little bit higher going into the spring? Because of the muddy pen conditions in Kansas. They're starting to dry out, but they had really cold temperatures and really muddy pen conditions since about the middle of December. And some of the live weight on those animals has been off about 100 pounds. So you've taken steer carcass weights down about 35 pounds in a course of about 6 weeks because of those muddy pen conditions. So we like to talk about weather market years. Is this going to be a weather market year or not? I'm in the camp. It's probably not going to be a weather market year because it's going to dry out fast enough. We didn't see this happen in November. It happened in February, and they're going to get 60-degree days here pretty soon instead of waiting a couple months. So my forecast would be we see a Fed market that pushes somewhere 91, 92 going into the spring. We have risk back to kind of 77, 78 going into the summer, and then we push back up towards that $2 going into the fall. April futures have already priced in the $2 market, so we're not necessarily talking about new highs. It's because of that lack of expansion we had in 2023, we're going to have a slower, methodical price uptrend as we go forward. So this is looking at the CME feeder cattle index. And ultimately, you know, $51 per hundredweight or $410 per head higher in 2023 compared to 2022. We would expect to see about another, call it a $30 increase here in 2024. You look at what the futures markets are pricing in today, I would say as we go into the second half of the year, I'd be a little bit more optimistic to prices. Meaning if we start looking at that expansion and the futures market starts sensing those tighter supplies going into 2025, I would say this pricing in kind of the lower end of the range expectations here in the second half of the year. And we're going to continue to hold the premium in the north. The cattle are better in the north, right? I mean, let's be honest. They're a little bit better in the north, maybe a lot better in the north compared to in the southern plains. They're worth a little bit more, they grade a little bit better, they feed a little bit better, they're a little more hardy, they're worth more. So we're going to see that premium hold as we go forward, but now we're into these tighter supplies. What if they start to expand in the south? Where are they going to get the cattle? They're going to have to go to the northern areas to get the cattle. You're going to have a little bit more demand. You're going to continue to hold a little better premium up here. And then on the calf market, ultimately, we see a calf market that could push up towards this 330 or even 335 going into the spring on a U.S. average basis. We're seeing video sales that are already up in that area, so we wouldn't be out of line to see that. And then let's look at that 20-year index versus a year ago. There's a big difference between what seasonally happens in the calf market and what happened last year. So if we look at a calf market going into 2024 in the second half of the year, don't expect that big break that you seasonally would have, especially the more heifers we retain, the more we're going to see a market like last year, because we do have tighter supplies, and we still need to figure out what's going on with the fertility rates. We're hearing lots of reports about open cows. So if we see more open cows, do we actually have a smaller calf crop than maybe what the USDA was expecting? So utility cow prices, following that market as we go forward, ultimately, they were up $19. We could see them up about another $15 this year, averaging $115. And then on the bred cow side, it doesn't take a computer for me to look at this and say, those are pretty strongly correlated, right? Those are looking at a fed steer per head relative to a bred cow. You can go back to 1980 and say, well, when it goes up, and when it goes down, it goes down. So it's a pretty good indicator. So if we're talking about a 184 fed market this year, we would expect bred female values on average in the US to be about $2,600. Is that expensive? Historically, it's expensive, right? But when you look at it as the calves it takes to pay for that cow, you're sitting at about 2.9 calves per cow. Historically, that's not a real big number, and that's accounting for the cash cow costs. So, still some room as we go forward, and what I start thinking about here is if I have some chance to develop some heifers, is there an opportunity for me to develop heifers to be able to take advantage of this? Because they're going to start to expand. Do we actually see some value in retaining those heifers to develop into cows instead of selling them as calves? So this is a story as we go through here. From 1980 to 1998, between all four sections of the industry, there was $32 per head to split. Is that a sustainable industry? No, it's not, right? 1998 was the beef demand low. And look at that far right. We continue to see the pie get bigger, meaning the improvements in grade, the improvements in quality, the improvements in weights, the consumer willing to pay for beef has now created a sustainable, longer-term environment for the cow-calf producer all the way through the feed yard. Ultimately, those colored bars, that shows that leverage shift, right? The green bars are going to get bigger, bringing the cash to the cow-calf producer to start to expand the industry of the beef cows as we go forward. Executive summary, I've said everything already.
Two things from that presentation. Number one, northern cattle are better, right? And number two, I've done a mental math on how many minutes I need to work to buy you a burger at Blue 42 tomorrow before you fly out of here, okay? Any remaining questions? You guys speak the language better than I do, but I would come to you if you want to ask a question for the sake of the group. I know that Troy will stick around at the end of the evening for your question at a one-on-one level. Also, any questions from the audience for Troy? There we go.
You had a slide early on with how much precipitation that we've had, and you said the northern and the southern plains is getting a good chunk of that moisture. the past month, 6 weeks, whatever it's been, every time you turn the news on, they talk about atmospheric rivers in LA, Oregon, those sorts of areas where they aren't having cattle. How is that influencing that data?
So, right to your mouth. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. So, it's not, because it's weighted by the number of beef cows per state. So it's daily precipitation by state as a weighted average of beef cows by state. So if you take New York, who doesn't have very many beef cows, and they get a ton of rain, it doesn't come into there.
Other questions? The microphone is in part to capture the audio for the recording here too. Go ahead.
So on the beef on dairy, so if we're gonna add 4.5 million head to the slaughter mix that we didn't have in 2014, and we keep comparing everything to 14 and how much better this market's going to be in the future. But as you showed from 55, when we had 8.5 billion pounds of beef, to last year when we had 26 billion pounds of beef, are we really sure we're going to have this market sustained on the cow-calf side for 4 or 5 more years?
So 4 or 5 more years, maybe not. 2 to 3, maybe 4 more years, yes. Is it so much better than 2014? We're already at record prices. And so we've added already 3 million beef on dairies. We can go to 4.5 million. So we only have 1.5 million more to add to the system. So we're not adding 4.5 million more, we're adding 1.5 million more from where we are today. Then you factor in inflation, and the whole point about 2014 isn't that the market is gonna be so much better. It's that the shape of the market is going to be different. Because we're not going to aggressively expand like we did in 2014, where the market just goes like this, right? You remember 2015 was a bear market year, 2016 was a bear market year. You made a low in 2017 at what, 95 cents? You went from 170 to 95. The market's going to be a lot more like this. It's not going to get as high as it did, in, relatively speaking, as 2014, but it should sustain itself a little bit longer because you don't have that aggressive expansion. Does that make sense?
Good question. Anything else from the audience for now? Okay, we got one more here. Go ahead.
Would you ever worry about the demand not coming back if this sustains for a while? Say we hit another drought in the coming years and prices keep going up, per capita consumption keeps going down. Would you worry about not getting that per capita consumption back up to where it was? Are we losing market share that we won't get back?
That's a really great question. And what I'm thinking about here, and why I'm taking a second, is we'll get that market share back as long as we continue to produce the beef that we produce today or better. Because the consumer has told us they want upper 2/3 choice and prime, and they want that high quality tasting experience. And we should get better genetics as we expand to go towards those attributes. Now, what I'm thinking though is, do we actually have to, not have to, I shouldn't say that. Edit? No, right? Does the market or does the beef cow inventory move lower because of the La Nina, because we drought again, right? And does that provide prices and maybe go back to your 5-6 years where you hold it at a higher level and maybe it doesn't get as high as the equal demand would be, okay? You do lose some demand as you go forward because the consumer will switch. But then as we start to expand, if we add 4.5 million beef on dairy animals to the system, does the consumer, US consumer, want the amount of beef if we took the beef cow inventory number back to where we were in January 1st of 2019? And that's where, to me, exports are going to play an important role of how we transition into that next level. is if the U.S. consumer only wants 52 pounds of beef, then you have to go to a export market. So I don't know if I talked around that. Does that make sense? Or you look confused. We can talk about this more. I got all night, right? So
Conversation to continue perhaps later in the evening. Anything else? Q&A for Troy.
Troy, I'm sure you guys have watched the consumer demand. What has happened with the, I'm going to call it the fake meat? Thank you.
yeah, so that was a big deal, right? And the fake meat or the Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat and all that other stuff, right? It like went to like 0.5% of consumption, and it started to drop off from there. And you look at some of the restaurants, like McDonald's did a study, and they put like Impossible Burger into their things. And they did like 200 restaurants for like 6 months, and they were like, yeah, we're never doing this again, right? Because the consumer doesn't want it. Now, what they have found is that it's not replacing beef. But you do have consumers out there that wouldn't eat beef in the first place that will eat it. But you don't see very many consumers saying, well, should I go to the grocery store and should I get an Impossible Burger or should I get a hamburger, right? You don't see that. You see the vegan that goes out there and says, should I get artichoke salad or should I get Impossible Burger? So it's below 0.5% of consumption now, and that's where it peaked.
There we go. Okay.
The consumers, with the price of beef continually going up, and our government is in a writing of a farm bill. Where do we stand when the beef price gets to a certain point where in order to keep the consumer eating beef, that they okay more and more imports to bring our price down to where the consumer is going to go back to eating our beef?
So
Being destroying our market with import beef.
essentially, I don't see that as a risk. And when I say this, I'm not saying we're not going to import more beef. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that we already have a free trade agreement with Mexico and Canada with unlimited beef. They can ship as much as our market will buy it. Australia, New Zealand, they're not meeting their quotas, right? Brazil, they have that 65,000 5 metric ton import quota. They just brought in Paraguay, Nicaragua, and all those other ones that meet that tariff rate. So I'm not going to answer whether or not I think the government is going to change that tariff rate on Brazil or on Paraguay. What I'm saying that even if they did, there's already enough of that tariff rate between Australia, New Zealand, Mexico, and Canada that if the market determined to bring in more beef, that little bit that they would change those other countries would be insignificant. Does that make sense? There's already the quota. They're not going to change it. We're not meeting it. Mexico and Canada are unlimited. So if they change Brazil from 65,000 to 125,000 metric tons, it all comes back to that overall pie hasn't really gotten any bigger.
What you're saying there is the beef ain't there again. Is that what you're saying? They're using it already. There's not a whole bunch more to be had anyway.
Correct.
No matter what there could be.
Correct, yep.
Out of the total number of U.S. beef cattle and everything, or of the cow herd and everything, you know the percentage that comes out of or from Texas? I know how significant this drought is and everything, but of the total number of cattle in the United States, of the cows producing calves and everything, what percentage do you know that's raised in Texas or Texas, Oklahoma? I know that's tremendous.
So I know this number, but now that you got me on the spot, it's not coming to my head.
Just a percentage.
It's like 85% of all the cattle that are raised in the central part of the U.S. And don't quote me, but I think it's something like 35% in Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas. Don't quote me on that number, but it's a pretty big number.
I know, I just thought you were going to say higher than that, but I don't
Yeah.
know. That's why I'm asking the question.
It's like a
I
third.
don't know how significant this is.
It's a big deal. Yeah,
It is.
yeah.
Okay.
Going once, going twice. Troy will be around at the end. Let's give a hand to Troy and thank him for coming.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
All right, we are ready to move on to our second speaker of the evening, and we've got Max Cossette from 701X in Fargo. And Max grew up on a family farm just outside of Fargo, and a farm that was homesteaded in 1869. It's been in the family ever since. He has a bachelor's degree in ag economics and a master's degree in agribusiness through North Dakota State University. Shortly after graduation, Max was approached by Kevin Biffert, the president and CEO of the 701X company, to help him with his idea of tracking cattle. He is now the VP of Business Development at 701X, and they continue adding software features and hardware sensors to help automate the ranching and livestock industry. We'd like to welcome our second and final speaker of the evening, Max Cossette.
Just want to thank you all for having me tonight. I appreciate being here and getting the opportunity to speak to all of you. Just want to warn you up front, I came down with a bad cold this weekend, so if I have to stop and blow my nose or cough in the middle of it, just want to get that out there right away. So, yeah, like you said, my name is Max Cossette. Kevin Biffert was our president and CEO. I am not a rancher, but I did grow up on a row crop operation. I was exposed to a lot of different technologies there. We had auto steer, section control on our sprayer. Now we've got on our planters, some other things like that. But Kevin and I kind of took an outsider's perspective looking into the industry, and really when I first started trying to make the business plan with Kevin and figuring out what these true problems the ranchers were having, and we went trying to look at the root cause of those problems and find a way to solve them. He had the idea to GPS track cattle, like that was mentioned, and once we started looking into the use case and what ranchers were looking for, we found out there's a lot of other cool things we could do as well. So Kevin is a serial entrepreneur. He actually grew up on a ranch near Killdeer on a family of 15. He was the middle child, and he went to Wahpeton, ended up working for 3M for a while, and then he got out of there and started his own business where it's called Fargo Automation, where he was building automation machinery for big pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer, Zoetis, building really expensive machines that were doing high-speed medical packaging, like syringe packaging. And then he sold that business, I think it was in 2018, and then his sisters that were still ranching were kind of bugging him, well, if you're so smart, why don't you tell me when my cows get out, because they were having a lot of issues with that. And then he actually started kind of looking into it and saw that there was a big need in the market for it. And he gave me a call shortly after I graduated from NDSU, and we attacked it from there. But I want this to be kind of a very open conversation, so if you guys have any questions or comments in the middle of my presentation, don't be afraid to raise up your hand and let me know. I'd be happy to answer your questions. So at 701X, as Troy was mentioning earlier, the market needs to advance, and you need different ways to do more with less, and that's kind of been our big motto. But I noticed one thing that he didn't mention is that technology is one way that we could do more with less as well. So our mission statement is to empower the livestock industry, and we're kind of doing this with new technologies that provide unprecedented, verifiable data, and we're just trying to find any way to, really bring data integrity into the industry. This slide here shows our product ecosystem, we call it. At the bottom there, you can see as a phone, it's our software app. So that app works both on the Android or the Google Play Store for Android and the Apple iOS Store. It's also a web desktop app as well, so no matter where you're recording your data, it can be seen on any of those different devices. It basically works as a digital calving book, so instead of going out to the pasture with your pen and paper and recording all your notes, you can now take out your phone, record any data that you're taking on your animals, so like birth dates, weights, medical records, vaccinations. There's a shoot side working mode, so you can record like when you're doing preg checks, or if you're branding, you can record all that information really quick and easily. It also works offline, so you don't have to worry about when you're out in the pasture, your phone losing reception and not recording your data. And then once you go back online, every person that's using the app gets all the new data and is linked up and knows all the new records. On the top right-hand corner there is our XT Pro tag. That's our GPS ear tag for cattle. And then we've got a Bluetooth ear tag is our XT Lite tag in the middle. So that can communicate through our XT Pro tag, through a cell phone, or through that X base via Bluetooth, and the XT Pro and the X base send data over cellular networks, so you don't necessarily, like the Pro tag does not need the X base to send data and stuff like that. And then that X base and the X Watson is a remote water tank sensor, so you can get updates on your water tanks out in the pasture. How we got here and built all this different technology, I really got to give a kudos to our team at 71X. We do everything in-house, so we've got mechanical engineers that have designed the enclosures of these tags. We've got hardware engineers that have designed the circuit boards and the chipset that is used on these tags. We've got embedded engineers that write the code of how these tags perform. We've got manufacturing engineers that assemble these tags in-house in Fargo, North Dakota here. And we've got software engineers that design that mobile app and the web desktop app. And our sales and marketing team is in-house. So whenever you have issues or questions with our products, basically they'll go right upstairs with the issues to the engineers and bring them up so that we can resolve it and get your problems answered right away. And that, yeah. So then our big flagship product is our XT Pro tag. And so that's this new one right here we just released. It's a new 2-pin design. So we've seen really great retention with this one compared to our last tag. We're having some issues with that. This tag connects over cell networks, so you don't need a base station or any high-dollar system to be able to get the data back to your phone. So all the data reports autonomously back to your cell phone or to your web app. And it's got a variety of different sensors on here where we track all the movement of the animal. So we know if when the animal's eating, ruminating, walking, and resting. And what we do with this tag is we take a GPS position every 15 minutes, and then it checks, you write your geo fence on our software platform, or you mark where your current fences are. And if that animal goes outside the fence, it sends an alert immediately. Otherwise, this is a very low power device. So if there's no alerts, if there's no health alerts or out of fence alerts, nothing like that, it just reports all the data once a day, and you get to set your check-in time. So basically, if you usually go out and check your cattle at 8 in the morning, or you go out and check them at noon, you can set that as your check-in time so you have pretty live updates when you're going out there and looking at your animals. So there's also health alerts on this tag. And so we actually had 4 cows last winter that got sick, and they were near home, near a water tank. We've got a ranch manager, Abe, at our test ranch in Grassy Butte, North Dakota, where we have about 150 red Angus cows and 6 bulls. And he went out there and looked at those cows, and he was like, we got the alerts in Fargo. Our data scientists were like, hey, check out these alerts. And we called up the ranch manager. He went out there and looked at those animals, and he's like, yeah, I went to notice that they're sick because they're so close to home. They're near water. They're not walking around much. But he went out there and looked at them. He's like, they're definitely sick. And he gave them some antibiotics, and they recovered about 3 days later. We could watch the footsteps go back to their normal rate. This tag also has bull mounting. So we created an algorithm. Our data scientists at 71X created an algorithm that detects every time a bull mounts, and then we give reports where you can compare bulls and see which ones are being most productive and which ones are being lazy, basically. The tag is also solar panel has a solar panel on it and recharges itself, so you don't need to go out there and change batteries or recharge batteries, as we know that's not very practical. Right here, we've got a couple examples of out-of-fence alerts. On the left side there, you can see an example of a bull that we have at our test ranch that actually got out, and that's about a week of data up there. Every one of those orange points is a GPS position every 15 minutes. You can click on any one of those points and see the exact date and time when that animal was there. We got that alert, and our ranch manager went out there, got on his horse, and brought that bull back within about 2 hours of it getting out, so that it was breeding our cows and not the neighbors. The other nice thing about it is it let us know exactly where the fence had a weak spot, and our ranch manager was able to go fix that right away. And then on the right side there, we had actually pushed the whole cow herd to the next pasture, and we pushed them out to about the middle of the pasture, so you can see where that start point is. And this one cow went back to the other pasture and grabbed its calf, and then we got this out-of-fence alert, and we were able to go grab the cow and the calf and put it with the rest of the herd. So we thought that was pretty cool too. This report here is a bull mounting report. As I mentioned we have this algorithm so you can compare bulls against each other. And you can see here that bull B in blue actually got foot rot in the middle of the season and quit mounting cows, whereas bull A continued mounting cows throughout the season. So that's one of the benefits of using this tag. Kind of the big value add right now with this tag, as it is $83 for the tag and then $42 annually for the cell data plan. The first year is $125, and every year after is $42, is to put it on your bulls, because you've got that out-of-fence alert, the bull mounting alert, and then I'm just about to show you the health alert as well. All right, yeah, that'll be after this one, but you can go back one. So this was actually when we were first putting this bull mounting algorithm out there. So in a little example of that story, we've got at our test ranch a small confined pen where we have video cameras on all these animals. There was one yearling bull with 17 heifers that we put in this small pen, and this yearling bull did not mount a single cow, and they're all going, or a single heifer. They're all going into heat, riding each other, and we had that on video camera, and we knew these heifers were in heat. And you can see this is about a 3-day period under that bull one where it's black there, and it showed about 25 mounts because this algorithm wasn't accurate when we first built it. Those were false positives. That animal wasn't actually mounting. But then we cut that exact tag off, put it on a different yearling bull that was the same age, and put him in the pen, and that next day, over an 8-hour period, he had 94 mounts that we verified on video camera. As you can see, it's pretty easy to tell how much more that bull 2 was doing than the first one. And we actually only paid $4,000 for that second bull, and that first bull was a $7,000 bull. So that's a little bit of the value you could see out of these tags. And then, like I mentioned, the health alerts as well. This was actually one of the first instances before we developed our health alerts. At our test ranch, we had a bull that slid down a hill and got stuck under a tree. And you can see where that first arrow is. That's where he got stuck under the tree. He went down to about 15% of its normal activity because he was still moving around and wiggling. He lived for 3.5 days, and then he flatlined and died. And then we drew a no movement alert we had at that time. We went out there, had the GPS location, saw where he was at, and then we kind of built our illness alert around this as well. But now we get alerted early enough to know that that animal would have drawn this illness alert when he got stuck under the tree. But that was a $5,000 bull that we lost right there. So here's an example of the health alerts on the top. So as you can see at the top, this animal started to get sick. We drew this illness alert. Our ranch manager went out there and actually darted this cow. And then we gave it some antibiotics, and about 3 days later, it came back up and started improving its activity again to normal levels. So we saved, as I had mentioned earlier, we actually saved 4 cows last winter because of this illness alert. And then on the bottom there, that's an example of our alert right where you see that cursor currently. That was a bull that we had out on pasture last year that got foot rot, drew the alert. We never went and treated it, and it just stayed that low level the whole time, hidden bushes, and didn't breed any cows after it got foot rot. Does anyone have any questions on the XT Pro tag before I move on to the next slides here? Okay.
Do you have a warranty on?
There's a 1-year warranty on the XT Pro tag. So we say the lifespan of the tag is 2 years on bulls and 3 years on cows.
Yeah, Max told us up front that he was comfortable with question and answer throughout. I'll throw in one more. I think your technology relies on cell data, so and which cell coverage continues to improve, but can you reach 90, 95, 99% of ranchers these days? Or are there people off the grid who this does not work for them?
Yeah, it's pretty high percentage. We've actually only had one instance of a rancher in Northern California that we shipped these tags out to and said, you know, they don't check in at all, and we had to return them. At our test ranch in Grassy Butte, my phone works almost nowhere. But the thing about these tags is they send really small amounts of data, so you basically need less cell reception than what it takes to send a text message in an area. So if you can send a text message, the tag should work. But with that, if an animal gets in an area where it can't send its data, it's got some smarts built into it where it will retry again in an hour, then it'll try again in 2 hours, then it'll try again if the animal's moving significantly enough. Otherwise, if an animal has an alert, like a illness alert or a no movement alert or an out of fence alert, when another pro tag is to walk by that animal and get within Bluetooth range, it's about a 50-foot radius, it picks up that alert on the other tag, and whichever animal can upload that alert first will do it. So there is it's kind of like a mesh network of tags. Whichever one can upload the data will do it, so you can find your animal and save it basically. Any other questions on this product for now? All right. So our second product here is our XT Lite tag. This is a Bluetooth ear tag that has RFID technology as well. One of the reasons we did that is a lot of ranchers are currently using RFID, so you can continue to use your wand, stuff like that. And it's also got an accelerometer where we track the footsteps of the animal. So these can actually draw those no movement alerts, like if the animal was to die. And then the Pro tags can pick up that alert and transmit it up. Basically, the Bluetooth technology allows this tag to check in through either a XT Pro tag, through a cell phone, or through our X-Base, and get a GPS location of the animal. So basically, if there's a bull out there, bull number 6, he takes a GPS position every 15 minutes. He scans Bluetooth, so it's about a 50-foot radius. Any animal within that 50-foot radius of him, when he's taking his GPS position, will check those animals in as well. So you got bull 6 here, and you got calf number 48 and 32 over there next to him within that 50-foot radius. It'll check them in as well, where their location is. And then on your cell phone, you can be riding around horseback or in your side-by-side, and you perform a roll call feature on our app, and it'll check in every animal that you've got within that 50-foot range of from your phone and give you a list of which ones you haven't seen, and then it'll also update on the map where your phone's GPS location is when you saw that animal. And then I'll show our X-Base next. But that is the X-Base also, we can go, yeah. The X-Base also has a water tank sensor add-on that you can add to it. So that will give you alerts if your water level gets too low, which is a common problem. You want to know that your cows don't have water. If your water level is too high, so if your float was to break, you don't want a muddy mess out there by your water tank either. And it will also, the user can set hot water alerts and cold water alerts. So if your water starts to freeze over, obviously a rancher wants to know that too. But every time an animal comes up to this X-Base, you can put it, either at water, at feed, at mineral. Every time they come up to it, whether it's a Pro tag or a Light tag, they get within that Bluetooth range of 50 feet. They check in that, hey, I've been at this station. And we record how much time they've spent there. We give you detailed reports of how many animals come there per hour. And You can set alerts too, like if an animal doesn't come to a water tank for a 24-hour period or a 48-hour period, you want to know which animal it was and where the last known location is, we can set alerts for that as well. And then another cool thing that I didn't mention about the light tag on that last slide is that you can have a cow with this pro tag and a calf with this light tag, and it'll track the amount of time that cow and calf spend with each other. And you can set alerts for if that cow isn't by that calf for a 24-hour period, you can get alerts for that as well. And then what's to come, like I mentioned currently, the XT Pro tag is well justified on the bulls because you can have health alerts, out of fence alerts, and bull mounting reports. We're trying to make this tag justified on your whole cow herd as well. So what we're doing for that is we're working on estrus detection and calving detection. And we've come a long ways on these studies as well. On the right there is a graph of an animal that went into heat that we're recording. And that orange area is where that animal is actually in heat. So you can see the day before, there was kind of a spike in that blue. It started having a little more activity, but then when it was actually in estrus in that orange period, it had really high activity. And then these graphs don't perfectly align with the dates, but then that second graph below it, this new tag here that we have actually has a heart rate sensor on it. So we're building detailed health alerts based on that as well. And you can see there's kind of a period of time where the heart rate's just a little higher, just to the right of the orange period, straight below where you're at, Carter, right there. That was when the animal was in heat as well. So we saw increased heart rate when that animal was going into heat. So we're trying to build the estrus algorithm around these different products. And then that bottom chart is just an aggregated data set of daily movement of these animals, of that animal when it was in heat. And you could see the actual movement of the animal is about 4 times as much the day it was in heat versus the other days. One other cool product I wanted to mention is on the left there in the chute, right above the chute, you can see just a little white thing right below and to the right where the mouse is, Carter, just look right, yep, to the left a little bit. Yeah, right there is our auto ID, we're calling it. So because of both these tags have Bluetooth technology in them, what that auto ID does is you mount it right above your chute, that animal comes in the chute, you close the head catch, that head's in there, the tag's right below it. It only looks for that one tag right below, in the chute. So it'll pop up on our software, that unique identification number off of that animal immediately. We also connect our software to Bluetooth scale heads. So say, animal 156 comes in the chute, the auto ID scans it, you don't need a person there to wand the animal even. Just pops up on your tablet or on your phone how you're using our working cattle mode. Says this is the animal in the chute, and then it puts that weight on that animal immediately, and then you can enter in the rest of the data that you're doing with that animal, like if you're preg checking, you can put if it's open or late or pregnant, and whatever else data you want to add with it. So that's kind of a gist of kind of what we've got going on at 701X, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you guys might have about this technology. Yes, sir.
Seems like great technology. I'm kind of assuming that some people are going to have to get past the price to do it. Since you're relatively new and stuff, what do you see for the price of it? Do you see it becoming more common technology with the price coming down, or?
Yeah, with all technology, hopefully the price can come down, and with higher volume sales, we believe the price could come down as well. The big thing I see right now is that this tag is justified on a bull. So it's $83 for the tag, or $125 the first year, $42 the second year. An example I like to give is that at our test ranch, we've got 6 bulls out there. So that first year at $125 a year would be $750. That second year would be less than $250. So I've got about $1,000 investment on our 6 bulls out there. And we've got 150 cows, and we had a 10% open rate this year. So we had 15 cows that were open. If we could breed 3 more cows this year and the next year, well, that's 6 more cows bred, $1,500 calves off of each one of them. That can justify the value of the tag. And we had 2 bulls that went down over the last 2 years that have died, and we had 2 that got foot rot this year that we were able to find and recover. But with those issues that we've been having, we can easily see the value in the tag for the bulls currently. So that's kind of what we've been asking, what we've really been trying to push currently is like, you don't have to jump all in head first and do your whole herd right away. We recommend just put on your bulls this first year, test out the technology, understand it, get to know it, and then we're working on estrus detection and calving detection on the other end. So then if you get to using it with your bulls, feel comfortable with it, maybe the following year it'll be justified on your cow herd. And then our XT light tags are a much cheaper option to get relative GPS tracking data on the pasture. These are only $17.50. But they do not have cellular connection and they do not have GPS capabilities. What they have is Bluetooth capability. So you have to use a Pro Tag or a cell phone to get that tracking data off of them. But then we would recommend if you had Pro Tags on your whole bull herd and your whole cow herd and your bulls, to put these light tags on all your calves to get that relative tracking data out in the pasture.
Is there something you can have just at the water tank so that they're all checking in when they come right there?
Yep, that would be that X base
Okay.
that we had. You can add your X watts into as well to get updates of your water levels. So every time an animal comes up to the water tank, they'll check in that way.
And then you mentioned the warranty. Do you have a fail rate on it?
So our previous tags, we were having some retention issues. There was about 20-30% fail rate on our previous tags, but these new tags we've been developing, we've been looking at all the issues we've been having with the previous tags. We've got all our engineers in-house that were attacking that problem vigorously. We've had these out on our test ranch for 3 months now. We actually just brought the animals in last week to evaluate them and see how the tags were doing, and we've had a 100% retention rate on our 150 animals. And currently, they're near home and they're in feed bunks, which that's where we were having the biggest issues with our last tags because they were just banging on those feed bunks all day long versus when they're out on pasture. So we feel very confident in our ability now. But one other thing I wanted to mention, like to get that relative tracking data, even at the current stage we're in, if you want to put some Pro Tags on some of maybe your heifers or lead cows that you have issues with, we recommend 1 Pro Tag for every 10 light tags to get good relative tracking data out on pasture.
What if you go higher? What if you do 1 to 20?
You'll still get some data and it'll check in that way as well. It just won't be as consistent. So we have had some users that have done that and it's worked pretty well actually.
Would you need to do that if you use your tank check-in?
You could probably reduce the number of tags. So, if you had a tank check-in and you had a 1 to 30 ratio, 1 to 20 or 1 to 30 ratio, you should still get pretty consistent data as well. So there's kind of, a game you could play with it. How you want to get your data.
You had said that they last 2 years on the bulls? Is that what?
That's our expected life expectancy.
So what if you leave them longer? Like, do they just eventually go dead, or what happens?
Well, that's just the expected life expectancy of it. So how long it could potentially last 5 years. Kind of something, just like a cell phone, technology advances so much over that time. We're going to continuously be redesigning and improving our design over time. So after 2-3 years, you might want to upgrade anyway. We're not buying them back, no.
Max, on your X base, what's I'm assuming they're battery operated?
They have a battery, but there's a solar panel on top of that X base, and you can plug it into like a 110 outlet as well. So there's options. On solar, we built a very big battery in there, big solar panel, so out on a pasture you shouldn't have issue with charging, but then if you do have it like in a confinement setting under a roof, you can plug it into the wall too.
Max, how many employees do you have at 701X, and what does training, retraining, customer service look like for those who are interested in your product but they run into tech issues?
Yep, so we've got about 32 full-time employees on staff currently, a lot of them being engineers and like data scientists. And then we've got 8 interns, most of them from NDSU that are working part-time and full-time in the summer. And basically, we do everything in-house. Our salesmen are in-house. Our engineers are all in-house. So if there's an issue, you call us up, let us know your issue right away, and our salesmen are going to either try and help you walk through that technical issue on their own, or if there truly is like a bug or something wrong with our system, they walk right up to the engineers and try and squash that issue as soon as possible. So that's kind of how our platform works, is we've got everyone in-house, talk to sales, customer service, and then they'll relay it to the engineers. We don't have a offshore call center, nothing like that. When you call us, you're going to talk to a live person.
Do I have to push one for English?
Nope, you do not have to do that. You have to click 1 to talk to sales, 2 to talk to finance, I think. So there is that one little step in there.
You talked about phone calls. Could you relay the story in development when every tag has a phone number and spam calls that the cows were getting
Yeah, so every one of these tags is assigned a cell phone number. And we actually had to build this private network, which is this pipeline our engineers had to go through, and this hassle that we didn't know of, because spam numbers were text messaging our tags and letting them know that, this product X, Y, and Z is available for 15% off, and was racking up our data rates that we didn't want to charge the ranchers. So we had to block that off so that now these tags cannot get incoming text messages with this private network.
Any other questions for Max for the sake of our program?
How well are the tags secured into the ears?
What was that?
How well are the tags secured into the ears?
Pretty well. So basically the tag has this new 2-pin button back design where you put the tag between the 2 veins of the animal's ear, and then that solar panel will extrude past the top of the ear so it gets really good sunlight and charging. But with that 2-pin, they're just like your regular tag. There's just a little bit of movement, but not a whole lot. But like I said, after our 3 months of testing, we had 100% retention with it, and we didn't see any irritation to the ears as well. So we were seeing those issues with our previous models where they would, it was a little too heavy and the animals would droop their heads a little bit. With this, we haven't had any of those issues. So we're very excited about getting them out to market. What was that?
Mention the reuse on those.
Yeah, so the Pro tags are reusable. You can cut them off of one animal, put them on a new animal, and then you just have to reassign it to which animal you put it on our software platform. However, these light tags, we're going for USDA 840 certification, and one of the stipulations of that certification is this has to be a non-reusable tag, so neither part can be reused. So the Pro tag is reusable, but the light tag is not reusable.
Do you have like a waiting list? Like if I wanted 10 tags, how long would it take to get them?
If you were to go on our site and order 10 tags, what we try to do is ship within that week. So we're trying to basically be the Amazon of ranching and get these products to you in 2 days. We're not quite there yet, so I'd expect a week delay. Because we just released this product, they are kind of doing pre-orders right now, but you actually go on, you buy these tags, and we're going to be shipping them by April 1st. And if you've got, if you're trying to put your bulls out to pasture a little before that, let us know, and we're going to try and work with you to make something happen.
Anything else?
How well is the charge on the solar?
So we've been seeing really promising results. Our previous model was we had a solar panel that was on the back side of the ear. We were getting about enough charging to last on that. So now with this new charging, looking right up at the sun, it's working really well. We actually added a faster processor on here and more memory so we could run more algorithms like this bull mounting algorithm, as well as our health algorithm, all these things at the same time. And yeah, our solar charging has been great on that. basically, if this tag were to be in complete darkness for 7 days, it would still check in over the cell network. After that 7 days, it would go dark, and then the Bluetooth would continue working for 30 days on the tag. But even when it's cloudy, they're still getting some charging. So even on cloudy days, we still see, 50% charging rate, so works pretty good. We haven't seen issues basically with anyone saying their tags are going out or going dead with our new platform.
Going once, going twice. I happen to know that both of them are staying tonight, traveling tomorrow, so questions after the program, one-on-one level could happen. Gutsy effort, Max, to power through the cold you've had and give us a great presentation. Let's give it up for Max, 701X.
Thanks for having me.
Folks, you can tell our Ag Committee has lots of support from some great sponsors. We are looking for the content that would bring you and a friend back next year, and we're going to start by surveying you when the time is right. I think this year you got great data-driven decision-making and a presentation from Troy and cutting-edge technology from Max. It's a great program I think we put together this year. We hope to see you again at the next chamber event. It's Thank a Farmer and a Rancher in the month of March. That's coming up. Banquet in a Field is our big one in July. As for this evening, we're glad you're here. Thank you for coming. Have a good evening and hope to see you next time.